67 years after the Guadalcanal campaign ended, a weathered leather journal surfaced in an estate sale in Billings, Montana. The journal belonged to Corporal Thomas "Tommy" Brennan, a Marine scout sniper who served with the 1st Marine Division during the Solomon Islands campaign from August 1942 through January 1943. Inside its water-stained pages were detailed field notes, sketch maps, and entries written in cramped handwriting that described something historians had long suspected but rarely documented: the direct translation of American wilderness hunting skills into military counter-sniper operations in the Pacific Theater. Tommy Brennan had been a deer hunter, not a casual weekend sportsman, but a professional tracker who guided wealthy clients through the Rocky Mountains and supplemented his family's income by selling elk and venison to markets in Butte and Helena. He understood terrain, animal behavior, wind direction, concealment, and patience. He could read tracks in mud, interpret broken branches, and predict movement based on environmental cues invisible to untrained eyes. When he enlisted in the Marine Corps in December 1941, 6 days after Pearl Harbor, he listed his occupation as hunting guide. That designation would save his life and take many others. The journal was purchased by Dr. Samuel Kincaid, a military historian at Montana State University who recognized its significance immediately. Brennan's entries were not heroic narratives. They were technical field observations written in the sparse, functional language of someone documenting work. The first entry, dated August 9, 1942, 2 days after the Marines landed on Guadalcanal, read, "Jap sniper killed Corporal Hayes at 0700 hours, single shot. No one saw muzzle flash, body found 40 yards from tree line, wound suggests downward angle. Check tree line, found broken branches 60 feet up in banyan tree. Sniper gone by the time we reached position. Tracks led northeast into Ridge Forest. Lost trail after 200 yards. By September 1942, Brennan's notes became more systematic. He began documenting Japanese sniper behavior with the same methodical attention he had once applied to tracking elk migrations. He noted their preferred concealment locations, their movement patterns after a kill, their use of natural camouflage, and their fatal mistake, remaining stationary too long after engagement. Lieutenant Colonel William "Wild Bill" Whaling, the architect of the Marine Corps Scout Sniper program, noticed Brennan's effectiveness and transferred him to the newly formed reconnaissance platoon, later called the Whaling Group, in late September. Brennan was issued a Springfield M19903 rifle equipped with an 8-AX inertial scope, a weapon that would become an extension of his body for the next 4 months. The Guadalcanal jungle was not Montana wilderness. It was hotter, denser, more alien. Visibility rarely exceeded 20 yards. The humidity rusted metal overnight. Insects swarmed constantly. Yet Brennan adapted his tracking methods to the environment with startling efficiency. He began teaching other Marines how to read the jungle the way he read mountain forests. Look for disturbances in natural patterns. Listen for silence where there should be noise. Watch for movement at unnatural heights. His first confirmed counter-sniper kill occurred on October 3, 1942, during operations near the Matanika River. A Japanese sniper had killed 2 Marines in the early morning hours. Brennan studied the wound trajectories, determined the sniper's firing position, and predicted his escape route based on terrain analysis. He positioned himself along that route and waited. 6 hours later, the Japanese sniper moved. Brennan fired once. The sniper fell from a tree 40 feet above the jungle floor. Brennan's journal entry for that day was characteristically brief. First kill, range 180 yards. Sniper descended from elevated position. Anticipated movement based on terrain slope and vegetation density. Single shot through upper torso, confirmed dead. Recovered Type 97 sniper rifle. By November 1942, Brennan had 11 confirmed kills. By December, 23. His effectiveness was not based on superior marksmanship. Many Marines were excellent shots. It was based on his ability to think like his prey, to anticipate behavior, to understand the environment as a system of predictable patterns. He was hunting men the way he had once hunted deer, and he was extraordinarily good at it, but the journal also reveals something darker. As the confirmed kill count increased, the tone of Brennan's entries began to shift. The clinical precision remained, but brief fragmented observations began appearing in the margins. Can't sleep. Hands won't stop shaking. Saw his face through scope before I fired. He was maybe 20 years old. The hunter from Montana had become something else, and he wasn't sure what that meant. Now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this story. We're interested in knowing how far these documented accounts travel and at what moments of the day or night they reach you. The Japanese sniper doctrine in the Pacific Theater was fundamentally different from American methods. Japanese snipers, trained as sokugeki, were not primarily marksmen. They were psychological weapons designed to instill fear, disrupt movement, and demoralize enemy forces through unpredictable, isolated killings. They operated alone or in pairs, often remaining in position for days without resupply, relying on extraordinary patience and willingness to sacrifice mobility for concealment. Their preferred tactic was elevation. Japanese snipers frequently climbed into the jungle canopy, sometimes as high as 70 or 80 feet, and secured themselves to branches using rope harnesses. From these positions, they had overlapping fields of fire across trails, clearings, and river crossings. The Type 97 sniper rifle they used was ideally suited for this role. It produced minimal muzzle flash, and its report was muffled by the dense jungle foliage, making it nearly impossible to locate by sound alone. American forces initially struggled to counter this tactic. Traditional counter-sniper methods, such as deploying spotters to identify muzzle flashes or using return fire to suppress threats, were largely ineffective in the jungle environment. Visibility was too limited. The sound of gunfire echoed unpredictably through vegetation. By the time Marines identified a sniper's position, the sniper had often relocated or remained motionless, camouflaged so effectively that even direct observation from 20 yards away revealed nothing. Tommy Brennan approached the problem differently. He didn't try to spot Japanese snipers visually. Instead, he tracked them as he would track animals. By studying their behavior, identifying their patterns, and predicting their movements before they occurred. His method, documented extensively in his journal and later analyzed by military historians, consisted of 4 stages. Stage 1, incident analysis. When a Marine was killed or wounded by sniper fire, Brennan examined the body and the surrounding area. He noted the wound's entry angle, the time of day, the victim's position, and environmental factors such as wind direction and sunlight. This information allowed him to estimate the sniper's firing position with reasonable accuracy. Stage 2, pattern recognition. Brennan documented every sniper incident on hand-drawn maps, marking locations, times, and estimated firing positions. Over weeks, patterns emerged. Japanese snipers favored certain types of trees, banyans and ironwoods with thick, horizontal branches. They preferred positions overlooking water sources, trails, and open ground where Marines were forced to move predictably. They tended to engage targets in early morning or late afternoon, when light conditions created shadows that enhanced concealment. Stage 3, terrain prediction. Once Brennan identified a sniper's firing position, he analyzed the surrounding terrain to predict escape routes. Japanese snipers rarely remained in position after a kill. Doing so invited counter-sniper fire or artillery bombardment. They descended from trees and moved quickly through predetermined routes that offered maximum concealment. Brennan studied vegetation density, slope angles, and natural corridors to anticipate where a sniper would go after engagement. Stage 4, Interception. Brennan positioned himself along predicted escape routes and waited, sometimes for hours, sometimes for an entire day. He moved minimally, controlled his breathing, and relied on auditory cues, the snap of a branch, the rustle of leaves, the faint scrape of boots on bark, to detect movement. When the target appeared, Brennan fired once. He rarely missed. This method required extraordinary patience and environmental awareness. It also required a psychological shift that Brennan found increasingly difficult to reconcile. He was not engaging enemy combatants in the heat of battle. He was stalking individual human beings, studying their habits, predicting their movements, and killing them with premeditated precision. It was indistinguishable from hunting. One journal entry dated November 14, 1942, captures this tension. Waited 8 hours for a Jap sniper to descend from a mahogany tree near the Lunga perimeter. When he finally came down, I watched him through the scope for maybe 30 seconds before I fired. He was adjusting his rifle sling. He had a canteen on his hip. He looked tired. I shot him in the chest. He fell without making a sound. I walked over and confirmed the kill. He couldn't have been older than 19. I took his rifle and left the body. We don't bury them. No time. No orders to do it. I keep thinking about his face. If this story surprised you, make sure to leave a like to support the channel. By December 1942, Tommy Brennan had become one of the most effective counter-snipers in the 1st Marine Division. His confirmed kill count had reached 23, a number that would eventually rise to 31 by the time he left Guadalcanal in late January 1943. His reputation spread quickly. Marines began requesting his presence on patrols. Officers sought his advice on route planning and defensive positioning. Lieutenant Colonel Whaling personally commended him for exceptional fieldcraft and combat effectiveness. But Brennan's journal entries from this period reveal a man struggling with the psychological burden of his work. Unlike infantry combat, where killing occurred in the chaos of massed fire, adrenaline, and survival instinct, sniper work was solitary, deliberate, and intimate. Brennan saw the faces of the men he killed. He watched them through magnified optics. He studied their movements, their habits, their vulnerabilities, and then he ended their lives with clinical precision. One entry, dated December 8, 1942, describes an engagement that haunted him. Japanese sniper operating near Hill 27 killed a Marine medic 2 days ago. I tracked him to a ridge overlooking the Tanaru River. Waited 12 hours. He appeared at dawn, descending from an ironwood tree. I had a clear shot at 210 yards, but I hesitated. I don't know why. I watched him through the scope. He was moving slowly, carefully. He stopped to drink from a canteen. He looked around. He seemed nervous. I realized he knew someone was hunting him. He was afraid. I fired. He dropped. I confirmed the kill. But I can't stop thinking about that hesitation. What does it mean when you hesitate to kill the enemy? What does it mean when you see his fear and recognize it as your own? The psychological toll of precision killing was not unique to Brennan. Military psychiatrists who later studied combat stress in World War II noted that snipers experienced disproportionately high rates of post-combat psychological disorders, what would later be termed post-traumatic stress disorder. The isolation of their work, the intimate nature of their kills, and the moral ambiguity of deliberately targeting individuals rather than engaging in collective combat created psychological burdens that many snipers carried for the rest of their lives. Brennan's effectiveness also created another problem. Japanese forces began actively hunting him. By mid-December, Japanese snipers operating in the Guadalcanal interior had been briefed on the presence of an American counter-sniper with exceptional tracking skills. Intelligence reports captured after the war revealed that Japanese commanders issued specific orders to locate and eliminate the American hunter. Brennan noted this development in his journal with grim humor. "Word is, the Japs are looking for me specifically now. Guess I've been doing my job too well. Funny how becoming good at killing makes you a target for the same thing." On December 19, 1942, Brennan narrowly escaped a coordinated ambush. He had been tracking a Japanese sniper near the Matanikau River when he noticed disturbed vegetation that didn't match natural patterns. His hunting instincts, honed over years in Montana wilderness, saved his life. He retreated immediately, circling wide through dense jungle, and discovered that 3 Japanese snipers had positioned themselves along his predicted approach route. They had been hunting him the same way he hunted them. Brennan repositioned, called in a Marine patrol for support, and engaged the snipers from an unexpected angle. 2 were killed. The 3rd escaped. The incident shook him. He wrote, "They were waiting for me. They knew how I think. They predicted my movements the way I predict theirs. I'm not hunting animals anymore. I'm hunting men who hunt me back. And I'm not sure I'm better at this than they are. I'm just luckier." By late December, Brennan was exhausted. He had been in continuous combat operations for nearly 5 months. He had barely slept. His hands trembled constantly. He had developed a persistent cough from prolonged exposure to jungle humidity and the smoke from artillery bombardments. His journal entries became shorter, more fragmented, less coherent. On December 28th, he wrote only, 31 kills, 31 men. I remember most of their faces." On January 5, 1943, Brennan was pulled from combat operations by Lieutenant Colonel Whaling, who recognized the signs of severe combat fatigue. Brennan was reassigned to rear area duties and eventually evacuated to Australia with the rest of the 1st Marine Division for rest and refit. He never returned to scout sniper operations. His war continued. He served in subsequent campaigns at Cape Gloucester and Peleliu, but always as a standard infantry rifleman, never again as a hunter of men. The Japanese snipers Tommy Brennan hunted were not faceless enemies. They were men, trained soldiers who had volunteered for sniper duty, believing their sacrifice would contribute to Imperial Japan's war effort. Many were veterans of campaigns in China and Manchuria. They were skilled, disciplined, and willing to endure extreme hardship. And like Brennan, they were also human beings carrying the psychological burden of their work. After the war, declassified Japanese military documents and personal diaries recovered from Guadalcanal provided insight into the experiences of Japanese snipers during the campaign. One diary belonging to Private First Class Hiroshi Yamada of the Imperial Japanese Army's 38th Division was discovered in 1992 by a salvage team clearing unexploded ordnance near the Lunga River. The diary had been sealed in a waterproof pouch and buried beneath the roots of a banyan tree. It contained 43 entries written between September and November 1942. Yamada's entries described the grinding reality of sniper operations in the jungle. He wrote about hunger. Japanese supply lines had been severed by American naval forces, and snipers operating independently received minimal rations. He described the physical agony of remaining motionless in tree canopies for hours, secured by ropes that cut into his torso, while insects crawled across his skin and tropical rain soaked through his uniform. He documented the constant fear of American counter-sniper fire and the psychological isolation of working alone for days without contact with other soldiers. One entry, dated October 17, 1942, reads, "I have been in this tree for 3 days. I have fired 4 times. I believe I killed 2 Americans, but I cannot confirm. I descended once to relieve myself and retrieve water from the river. I thought I heard movement behind me and climbed back into the tree immediately. I do not know if I imagined it or if an American was tracking me. I am afraid to descend again, I have one rice ball left. My hands are numb. I can no longer feel my legs. Another entry dated November 2nd. I killed an American today. He was crossing a clearing near the river. I waited until he stopped to adjust his pack. I fired once. He fell. I watched through my scope as his companions ran to him. They dragged him into cover. I do not know if he died. I hope he did not suffer. I descended immediately and moved to a secondary position. I heard gunfire behind me. They were shooting at the tree I had occupied. I do not know how they knew where I was. Perhaps they are hunting me as I hunt them. Yamada's final entry is dated November 8th, 1942. I am very weak. I have not eaten in 4 days. I tried to return to our lines, but I became disoriented. I do not know where I am. I hear American voices nearby. I climbed a tree to hide. I will wait until dark and try again. If I do not survive, I hope this diary reaches my family. Tell them I served with honor. Tell them I was not afraid. Hiroshi Yamada's remains were discovered in 1944 by a Marine patrol. He had died in the tree where he wrote his final entry, likely from dehydration, starvation, or disease. His body was partially mummified by the dry season heat. His rifle was still secured across his chest. Tommy Brennan never knew Hiroshi Yamada's name. He may have encountered him, tracked him, or even killed him. There is no way to confirm. But their experiences were mirror images. Two men trained to kill in isolation, carrying weapons through hostile terrain, hunting and being hunted, struggling with fear, exhaustion, and the moral weight of deliberate killing. One was a deer hunter from Montana. The other was a farmer's son from Kumamoto Prefecture. Both were shaped by their environments, their training, and the terrible necessities of war. And both carried scars, physical or psychological, that never fully healed. The psychological impact on Japanese snipers was documented in post-war interviews conducted by Allied intelligence officers. Many surviving Japanese snipers described persistent nightmares, intrusive memories, and profound guilt over their wartime actions. Some refused to speak about their experiences at all. Others spoke openly, describing sniper duty as the loneliest war and the work that steals your humanity. The men in the trees were not monsters. They were soldiers doing the work their nations asked of them, and that work destroyed them in ways that bullets and artillery never could. Tommy Brennan returned to Montana in October 1945, 2 months after Japan's surrender. He was 26 years old. He had survived 4 major Pacific campaigns: Guadalcanal, Cape Gloucester, Peleliu, and Okinawa. He had been awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action, the Bronze Star with V device for meritorious service under combat conditions, and the Purple Heart for shrapnel wounds sustained during the Peleliu campaign when a Japanese mortar round detonated 15 yards from his position, sending fragments of steel into his left shoulder and back. He carried a duffel bag containing his service uniform, a few personal items, and the leather journal he had kept throughout the war. He did not bring his rifle. He had left the Springfield M1903 with the unit armorer at Camp Pendleton, refusing even to touch it during the decommissioning process. He returned to the family ranch outside Billings, where his father, Michael Brennan, and 2 younger brothers, Patrick and Robert, were waiting on the platform of the train station. They embraced him. They asked no questions. They had heard stories from other returning veterans, men who came home silent, withdrawn, haunted by experiences that could not be translated into civilian language. They understood that some wars continued long after the shooting stopped. Brennan attempted to resume his pre-war life. He worked the ranch alongside his father and brothers, repairing fences damaged by winter storms, tending cattle through the harsh Montana seasons, fixing machinery that had deteriorated during the war years when replacement parts were scarce and labor was scarcer. He performed the work competently, mechanically, but without the enthusiasm or connection he had once felt. His family noticed that he moved through daily tasks as though performing a role rather than living a life, but he could not return to hunting. His father, a lifelong outdoorsman who had taught Tommy to track elk through the Rockies when he was 8 years old, invited him on a deer hunt in November 1945, an annual tradition the Brennan family had maintained for 3 generations. The opening day of deer season had always been sacred in the Brennan household, a ritual that marked the transition from autumn to winter, a time when fathers and sons moved through mountain wilderness together, bound by shared knowledge and unspoken understanding. Tommy declined. His father asked why. Tommy said only, "I don't want to do that anymore." When his father pressed, gently, concerned, Tommy walked out of the house and did not return for 6 hours. He was found sitting on a ridge overlooking the ranch, staring at the mountains in silence. He never explained. His father never asked again. Tommy Brennan never hunted again. Not once in the remaining 62 years of his life. The rifles that had once hung above the fireplace, a Winchester Model 70, a Remington 700, the custom-built .30-06 his grandfather had used to hunt elk in the Bitterroot Range, were eventually sold at an estate sale in 1952. Tommy refused to touch them. He would not enter a room where they were displayed. The sight of a rifle scope triggered visible distress. His hands would tremble, his breathing would accelerate, and he would quietly leave the space without explanation. According to family members interviewed by Dr. Samuel Kincaid in 2010, as part of his research into Marine Corps Scout sniper experiences during World War II, Tommy Brennan suffered from severe nightmares for decades after the war. He would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, sometimes shouting names or phrases no one understood. His wife, Catherine, who married him in 1952, described waking to find him sitting upright in bed, eyes open but unseeing, murmuring in a language she eventually realized was fragmented Japanese. Words he had heard in the jungle, enemy soldiers calling to each other, phrases that had embedded themselves in his memory like shrapnel. He developed a profound aversion to loud noises. Fireworks on the 4th of July sent him into panic. Car backfires caused visible flinching. Even the crack of a splitting log in the fireplace, a sound he had heard thousands of times growing up, would make him rigid, his jaw clenched, his eyes scanning the room as though searching for threats. He avoided crowded places. He preferred solitude. He rarely attended social gatherings, church functions, or community events. When he did, he positioned himself near exits and kept his back to walls, habits drilled into him by 4 years of combat and impossible to unlearn. In 1952, Tommy married Catherine Morris, a schoolteacher from Great Falls, who had moved to Billings to work at the local elementary school. She was 24, he was 33. She had heard he was a war veteran, decorated for bravery, but he never spoke of it. She learned about his Silver Star only when his mother mentioned it in passing 2 years into their marriage. When Catherine asked Tommy about it, he changed the subject immediately. She learned not to ask. They had 3 children, Michael, born in 1953, Sarah, born in 1955, and Robert, born in 1958. Tommy was a devoted father, quiet, patient, gentle with his children in ways that surprised those who knew his reputation as a hardened combat veteran. He read to them every night. He taught them to ride horses, to repair engines, to navigate by stars, but he never taught them to hunt. When his eldest son, Michael, asked at age 12 if his father would take him deer hunting like other fathers did with their sons, Tommy said, "Ask your Uncle Patrick, he'll teach you." Michael asked why his father wouldn't. Tommy said nothing. He walked out of the house and didn't return until after dark. Tommy worked a succession of jobs after the war. He spent 2 years as a ranch hand on a neighboring property, then transitioned to work as a mechanic at a Ford dealership in Billings, a job he held for nearly 15 years. He was skilled, reliable, and uncomplaining. His co-workers described him as professional, but distant. He ate lunch alone. He didn't participate in workplace social events. He arrived early, worked efficiently, and left immediately when his shift ended. In 1972, he transitioned to part-time work as a bookkeeper for a local feed supply store, a position that required minimal human interaction and allowed him to work in relative isolation. He held this position until his retirement in 1987. Catherine Brennan, interviewed in 2009, 2 years after Tommy's death, described her husband as haunted by something he would never explain. She said, "He was a good father, a good husband, but there were parts of him I never reached. He would sit on the porch in the evenings and stare at the mountains for hours. He wouldn't speak. He wouldn't move. It was like he was somewhere else entirely. I learned early in our marriage that there were questions I couldn't ask. There were rooms inside him I wasn't allowed to enter, and I knew better than to push. Whatever he had experienced in the war, it wasn't something he could share. It wasn't something he could put into words. It lived inside him like a wound that never healed." She described an incident that occurred in 1967, 22 years after the war ended. The family had attended a 4th of July celebration in downtown Billings. Fireworks were scheduled for after dark. When the first explosion echoed across the city, Tommy stood abruptly, grabbed Catherine's arm with enough force to leave bruises, and pulled her and the children toward the car. His face was pale, his hands were shaking. He drove them home in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. When they arrived, he went directly to the bedroom and didn't emerge until the following morning. Catherine asked what had happened. He said only, "I can't do that anymore." They never attended another fireworks display. Tommy Brennan's journal remained hidden for decades. He never spoke of it, never showed it to anyone, never acknowledged its existence. After his death in 2007 at the age of 88 from complications related to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, likely caused by years of exposure to cigarette smoke and the residual effects of jungle humidity and chemical exposure during the war, his family discovered it among his belongings while sorting through his estate. It was wrapped in oilcloth, sealed in a metal ammunition box, and stored at the back of a closet beneath folded uniforms he had never worn after 1945. His children read it together over the course of several days. They wept, they argued, they struggled to reconcile the man they had known, quiet, gentle, withdrawn, with the man described in the journal's pages. A precision killer who had stalked and eliminated 31 human beings over the course of 4 months, documenting each kill with clinical precision, recording their movements, their habits, their final moments. Michael Brennan, the eldest son, later said, "It explained everything. Why he never hunted, why he hated loud noises, why he couldn't talk about the war. He had killed people, not in the chaos of battle, but deliberately, methodically, after watching them for hours or days. He knew their faces, he remembered them, and it destroyed him." The journal is now housed in the Montana Historical Society archives in Helena, available to researchers by appointment. It has been cited in multiple academic studies on combat psychology, the effectiveness of Marine Corps scout sniper operations during World War II, and the long-term psychological consequences of precision warfare. Military historians consider it one of the most detailed and psychologically honest accounts of counter-sniper operations in the Pacific Theater, comparable in significance to the personal writings of other decorated snipers whose post-war struggles revealed the moral complexities of their wartime roles. Dr. Samuel Kincaid, the military historian who purchased the journal at the estate sale and later donated it to the Montana Historical Society with the family's permission, offered this assessment in his 2012 book, Hunters of Men, Scout Snipers, and the Psychology of Precision Warfare. Tommy Brennan was extraordinarily effective at what he did. His tracking skills, environmental awareness, tactical intelligence, and fieldcraft made him one of the most successful counter-snipers in the Marine Corps during the Guadalcanal campaign. His methods were later studied and incorporated into formal scout sniper training programs that continue to this day. But effectiveness and survival are not the same as moral resolution. Brennan killed 31 men in 4 months. He did so with deliberation, precision, and full conscious awareness of what he was doing. He was not killing in the heat of battle, where adrenaline and survival instinct override moral reflection. He was executing human beings from concealment after stalking them for hours or days, watching them through magnified optics, learning their habits, predicting their movements, and then ending their lives with a single shot. That is a fundamentally different psychological experience than infantry combat, and it left scars that never healed. Kincaid's research also uncovered that Brennan was not alone in his post-war struggles. Interviews with surviving Marine Corps scout snipers from World War II, conducted between 2008 and 2011, before most had passed away, revealed consistent patterns of psychological trauma, social withdrawal, and profound moral discomfort with their wartime roles. Many refused to discuss their service. Several had never told their families they had been snipers, identifying themselves only as infantry or reconnaissance. One veteran, interviewed anonymously, said, "You can't explain it to people who weren't there. They think sniping is heroic. They think it's like hunting. But it's not. When you hunt, you don't see the animal's face. You don't watch it for hours. You don't learn its habits. You don't think about whether it has a family, and you don't carry its death with you for the rest of your life." In his final journal entry, written on January 5, 1943, the day he was pulled from combat operations by Lieutenant Colonel Whaling due to severe combat fatigue, Brennan wrote, "They tell me I did good work. They say I saved lives by killing enemy snipers before they could kill Marines. Maybe that's true. Maybe it matters. But I can't stop thinking about the men I killed. I see their faces when I close my eyes. I remember the way they moved, the way they hesitated, the way they adjusted their rifles, the way they looked around nervously as though they knew someone was watching. I remember the way they fell. I was hunting them the way I used to hunt deer in Montana. But deer don't have families. Deer don't have names. Deer don't look afraid. I don't know what I've become. I don't know if I can go back to being who I was before the war. I don't know if that person still exists. I think maybe he died somewhere in the jungle, and whoever came out, whoever survived, I don't recognize him." Tommy Brennan returned home. He lived a long life by most measures. 62 years after the war ended, 62 years of marriage, children, work, and the quiet rhythms of civilian existence. He raised a family. He worked honest jobs. He paid his taxes, attended church occasionally, helped neighbors when asked, and died peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by people who loved him. But a part of him never left Guadalcanal. A part of him remained in the jungle forever, watching through a rifle scope, waiting for movement, carrying the weight of 31 deliberate kills, and the knowledge that being exceptionally good at something terrible does not make it any less terrible. The war ended in August 1945. The jungle was reclaimed by nature. The men in the trees, American and Japanese alike, became memories, then statistics, then footnotes in history books written by people who were never there. But the weight remains. The moral complexity remains. The question remains, what does it cost a man to become a hunter of men? And can that cost ever truly be repaid? Tommy Brennan's grave is located in Mount View Cemetery outside Billings, beneath a simple headstone that reads, "Thomas Michael Brennan, 1919-2007, beloved husband and father, Semper Fidelis." There is no mention of his Silver Star, his Bronze Star, or his 31 confirmed kills. His family chose the inscription deliberately. They wanted him remembered not for what the war made him do, but for who he was to them. A quiet man who carried an unbearable weight with dignity, who refused to pass that weight to his children, and who chose silence over glory because he understood that some achievements are not worth celebrating. The hunter from Montana stopped hunting. But the war never stopped hunting him. It followed him home. It lived in his nightmares. It echoed in every loud noise. It hid in the shadows of every forest he refused to enter, and when he finally died, 88 years old, his lungs failing, his body worn, perhaps the only mercy was that the hunting finally stopped. Perhaps the faces he saw when he closed his eyes finally faded. Perhaps at last he found peace. But we will never know. Because Tommy Brennan, like so many veterans of that war, carried his silence to the grave. And silence, ultimately, is all that remains. Subscribe to our channel to explore more cases and curiosities from World War II. Thank you for following the story. See you in the end.